Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at mastering layout techniques in Oxygen Builder. It's going to be a very exciting one. The aim of this video is to show various techniques you need to know or you need to understand in order to build a complex layout. Each lesson we're going to learn will serve as a building block, so to speak, for the overall knowledge of putting a decent website together in terms of layout. All right, let's get into it. So I have selected the list of things I want to talk about, and one thing is going to be glaringly missing, which is grids. I'm not going to be talking about grids in this video because I think that should be handled as a different topic on its own. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about so many other things. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Flexbox, okay, and I'm going to talk about the different positioning, the most widely used positionings, and sizing and spacing. And I'm also going to be talking about pseudo elements, specifically before and after, because of the important role they play in page layout. So first, let's talk about Flexbox. I mean, what is Flexbox? It's what we use in Oxygen. Oxygen is based on the Flexbox engine, so we use it a lot. So we use display flex, stack horizontally and all that. So we're going to take a deep dive into the features of Flex. Now, one of the things I've realized is that a lot of times we don't really use. If you go to layout, there are a lot of things about the Flexbox that we don't really use. Or let's say most people don't really use it, except those that really understand how Flexbox work, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at. What is Flexbox? It's simply a short for flexible layout. That's just what it is. Flexible layout. Flexbox makes it easy, to design flexible, responsive layout structure without using the previously preferred float, which was a system of positioning elements on the website or different kinds of positioning. The Flexbox properties are supported in all modern browsers, and I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate it now. Okay, so I have with me here a div. I have a section with a heading, okay, and a div, and in that div I just have three cards. Okay, so these are just regular cards that they have classes. All of them share the same classes: the card image, the card name, that is the name of whoever is here, and the card description, and they're basically the same, three of them. Okay, and right now they are just there. Nothing is applied, no styling is applied to the container, to the parent. Okay, so what if you want to stack it horizontally, three of them? Now, one of the first thing that people usually do, which I'm going to start with, okay, will be to select this card, and then because I want to stack it three, I want to make it like the width to be 1/3, so which is going to be 33.3%. okay, so that automatically makes it 1/3 of the width, okay, of the parent. So the parent is 100%, okay, width, and this is going to be 33% of the parent. And now we can go ahead to stack it horizontally. Now I want you to take note that let's back up. Okay, now if I remove this 33.3% and I stack it horizontally, it's still going to stack horizontally. Okay, it's still going to stack, and which is fine, and we're going to take a look at the importance of that. But for now, let's just keep it at the 33.3% and see if there's any downside to doing it that way. So I'm going to stack it horizontally now, and to space it, one of the ways when it comes to Flexbox is usually a challenge, to give it a space. And if you're using Grid, it's very simple. Grid has the grid gap, which is supported by all browsers, but the Flexbox also has a gap property. So if you go to CSS, custom CSS of the parent element, and then you just write gap, and then let's say 1 M. Okay, now we have that gap, and even if you stack it vertically, you see that gap is still there, but it's not really supported in most of the browsers. Did I say most? That's wrong. It's not supported in some of the older browsers, like the older Safari, the older Internet Explorer, but it has up to about 87% support, and if you really don't want to risk it, so you're better off not using it. So let me take that off. Okay, so what's the alternative? The alternative, one other way you can use it is if you make this less than 33%. So let's say you just calculate, you use a calculation function. Okay, let's say you calculate 33%. Okay, then you subtract that 1m, let's subtract 0.5 m, okay, from it, and then we're going to go to the parent and make it space between. Let's do that again. Okay, this didn't work because we need to give it a space here. Okay, so please take note that calculate function, the operator doesn't have to, if it joins, it's not going to work. Okay, so now, so that separates it. Okay, yeah, so that's just one of the ways to do that. I'm just going to take that off. But what is the downside of using 1/3 of the width? Okay, what's the downside? Let's assume that maybe this was gone. So you can see that we have a gap. Okay, let me just release. However you do it, you're going to have a gap. This is not going to automatically fill in. That is one of the downside of using specific width for the Flexbox child element. And the truth is, you don't really need to do that. If you want a 3-column, Flexbox layout, you really don't need to make each of the cells 1/3. So let me take that out completely and see what happens. And it's actually good if you make it 100%. Okay, so you make it 100%, and then I'm going to bring this one back so you can see that using 100% still gives you the same result. Now, when you use 100%, you're not going to be able to do that calculated, technique to give it a space. Okay, you wouldn't be able to do that. It's not going to work. Okay, so what you're going to do is you will have to give it, the normal margin right and take it off from the last child. Okay, so let's say we're going to give it a margin right of 10 pixel. Okay, but then we want to take that out from the last child. So we add a pseudo element and write last child. Okay. So the last child selector. Okay, so that takes it away. Now that is assuming that you have just 3. So if you had more than 3, you are not going to use last child. For instance, if I had no, not necessarily more than 3. What I meant to say is if you had more than 1 column, like you had another one under, okay, so it's going to, you have to specify whether it's going to be the nth child 3, okay, or the nth child 6. So one of the advantages of using this technique, using 100% for all the columns, is if you wanted to conditionally output any of these divs, and and then the condition wasn't met. Okay, so let me save this and go to the front end. So you can see that the 3 divs are there. Okay, don't mind the fact that they are not the same height. Okay, that is a very easy fix. Now, and then I place a condition on this and say, do it if the author name is equals to never. Okay, and then I save it. If I go back to refresh, you see the remaining divs, take up the remaining space. But if we had 33%, okay, for this card, if we had 33% for the width, like we did initially, this is what we're going to get. So it's going to be obvious that, there's something missing here. So that is one of the disadvantages of using that other approach. Okay, let's quickly take a look at another way to add the spaces. Okay, so let's remove this and child selector, and I'm going to take off this, and then I just want to clear that condition. Okay, one of the way you can add space, to this Flexbox child element is to use what you call the adjacent child selector. So you want a situation where you apply a left div. Okay, so let's say we want to apply sorry, a left margin. Okay, so you can see that this is affected. So you want a situation that you're going to apply it to only the div that has a sibling next to it. Okay, so this doesn't have a sibling, you know, next to it, so we don't want it to apply to this. So we're going to use just a custom CSS to do that. And I want to encourage you, even if you're using a page builder, it's really important that you get comfortable, you know, using, you know, custom code, because there's just a limit to how much you're going to be able to do complex layouts if you depend only on the builder's settings. It really doesn't matter which builder you're using. It doesn't matter. Any builder you use cannot give you everything you need for an unlimited layout capability. Okay, so you're going to just get comfortable using a few code, nothing much. Okay, so I really don't want to go into the style sheet because it takes too many clicks. So to make it fast, I just want to drop a code block here, so and use that. I'm going to use that CSS here. So now to apply that, I want to select the ID of the parent. Okay, or I could give the parents a class. I could just call it card parent. Okay, and now I'm gonna go to that code block, to the CSS. Okay, and then I'm just gonna call that card parent class, and now I'm gonna use the direct child selector. Okay, but I want to select now these. I think that selects all the child. Margin left 10 pixel. So now it gives a 10 pixel, but even this first one, okay, has that 10 pixel, but we don't want all the children to have 10 pixels. So we want children that have sibling. So now that's what that means. Now you can see it applies only to this and this, because this has a sibling next to it. Okay, but this doesn't have a sibling next to it. Now what I mean next to it is before it. So this means the parents of the card classes, okay, is selecting only the cards that have a sibling before it. Okay, so it's not selecting this one. So that gives, so there's no need to come all the way here and, you know, take away any margin that you don't want. So this is kind of a perfect solution for it. Okay, let's take a look at another situation. Now that we have these cards, okay, being 100%, what if we want to have a layout with maybe two divs, okay, but one of them is let's say 70% or 60% and the other one is 40% or 30%. Let's duplicate this. Okay, I'm just going to duplicate that. Now I want to give this second set of cards a different class, so I'm just going to call it card 2. Okay, and I'm going to copy the properties here, and then I'm going to delete that. So I'll do the same here. I'm going to delete that class from there and apply it here. Okay, delete this. All right, so we have a different set of cards here. Okay, let me just move this. Yeah, wanted to move this up here. All right, so just to make it look different. Okay, all right, that's that. All right, so that looks a bit different. Okay, now what if we wanted to make these, let me take off one of these cards. So I'm gonna take this off. Let me just delete that completely. What if we wanted to make these 70% and these 30%, that layout that we're all familiar with? Normally what we usually do is to go to the ID. Okay, for instance, I can come here. Let me remove that 100% from here. So for instance, you go here and then you make it 70%, okay, and then you go here and make it 30%. So you have that, layout, but we're still going to be faced with the problem we talked about earlier, where if you want to conditionally output this, or this div is not available, we just have this space hanging there. Okay, so what are we going to do? Let me take out that unit, okay, value rather. So now let's go back to our card, and then we're going to give it 100%. Now, but we want this to be 70%, but we still want to solve the problem where if we don't have, the second card, this one still fills up. Okay, so how do we do that? So what we do is we go to the card, okay, and then what we're going to do is, now we want the first item or the second item depending on what you want. So let's assume we wanted the first item to be 70%. So I'm just going to go here and just add first child. Okay, so we're going to add the first child to that card class, and then we want the minimum width of that first child to be 70%. Okay, so that's all we need to do. We don't even need to do anything here because automatically it's going to shrink. Okay, but this, we want it to be 70%. Now, if we have a situation where this card is no longer available, that will still grow and fill in. Okay, and if we have a situation where this card is no longer available, this will still grow and fill in. So now these cases are particularly useful if you wanted to, like I mentioned earlier, conditionally output certain things. For instance, when I was doing a WooCommerce tutorial, I had a section where we had two buttons, and one of the buttons should only show if maybe the product is a simple product, but if it's a variable product, we don't want that. We didn't want that button to show. And in a case like that, if we use this kind of layout where these buttons are placed side by side, if you give it a definite width, and then that button, maybe we go to a page, okay, where the product is a variable product and we didn't want the other button to show. Now, if that button doesn't show, this one is going to be left hanging and it's not going to make for a good layout. So that is one particular use case for this kind of layout approach, and it's really flexible and it's really powerful. So, and because we're using the nth child and we're not using the ID, okay, so it means that every first child, any first child, so if we move this here, is going to be this, that setting is going to be applied to this. If we move it this other way, this setting is going to be applied to this. So it makes sense. Okay, so and let's say we wanted to use we had 3, okay, and then we didn't want to use that first child, but we wanted to use the second child. We want the second child to be a bit bigger than the other, so maybe we wanted this to be 30, 30, 40. Okay, so we wanted the second child. Okay, so we're gonna add no, not after, we're gonna add nth child 2, okay, and then we make that a minimum width of, so we want this to be 30, 30, then that's going to make this 40. So we wanted that middle one to be a bit bigger. Okay, so and we had that. So in this situation, if we move this to the middle, you see the middle one is always bigger. It does not matter which one it is. So using the nth child rather than using the ID for a use case for this kind of situation is a better approach. Let's save that. Now we were going to deal with content being, this shorter. I believe everyone knows how to do that, but for the sake of those who may not know, one way we can make this, now when you have cards like this, typically the ones with the most content, will grow taller than the other. So let me just do that. As you're going to see, it's going to grow taller. One very common way of fixing this is just to go to the parent, okay, and then just go to stretch, and it's going to stretch. Okay, so that's a very easy fix. Now that applies to all the children of that, that div. Now what if you wanted to just fix that with only one? Perhaps there are situations where you wanted the middle one to just remain like that. Maybe you just wanted to deal with only one. You could select that, okay, and then in this case, you're probably better off using the ID, okay? Or if you wanted to use the nth child, maybe you wanted it to apply to a specific, child position. Maybe say the third child, okay? You can still use that. But since we already have an nth child declaration, let's just do that for the second child, okay? So I'm going to go to layout, and then we're going to use what you call the Flexbox child controls, where you have the align self properties. So we want to align, we want it to stretch. So you see the second child stretches. Now, if we move this div, now this is, let me change the picture for this so that let me change the picture for that. All right, so we're going to see the difference. Now, if we move this div to the second position, see, it's going to adapt, you know, that property. Okay, so yeah, so that is if you want to apply to just one. So you use the Flexbox child control. So we had that on the second child. So let me take that out. But in this case, I'll just prefer to, you know, just stretch it. Okay. What did I do to that second child? I think I deleted that 40%. 40. All right. Okay, so let's continue. Let's look at responsiveness. Okay. Now, so far we've been using 100% for this. And what if we go down the breakpoint? Now, it's not automatically responsive. Okay. It's not automatically responsive. So you can see what is happening here. Now, what if we want to stack them up on top of each other at a certain breakpoint? Now, normally, if you were using 33, 33, 33, okay, what you'll do is that maybe when you get to a breakpoint like this, you're going to select that particular card and change it back to 100%, so for it to start. But in this case, they are already at 100%. The cards are already at 100%. So let's make this 100%. Okay, so the cards are already at 100%. So what do we do in this case? So what we do, we simply go to the parent and just stack it vertically, and that's all. We stack it vertically, and notice that we had that left-right sibling thing, okay, that applied let me take away this particular one. So let's deal with one at a time. I'm going to remove this. Okay, now we had that adjacent child, you know, control where we had this space. Okay, now when we go to this breakpoint, so we're going to see that we still have that. Okay, we still have that. So how do we resolve this? Let's go back to that code block. Okay, so we have at this breakpoint 767. Okay, 767. So we don't want these to apply. So if I take this off completely, you see this, everything looks good. You know, everything is fixed. It looks okay. Let me return that and darken the section a bit more. Okay, so the background of the section, let me just make it a bit darker. Okay, so you can see what is going on here. So let me make it darker. All right, so you can see what is going on here. So let's go back to the code block. Okay, and so if I take that off, if I delete that, now everything, you know, aligns. But we need it because at the bigger breakpoint we still need that space. Okay, so I'm not going to delete it, but rather now when we get to this breakpoint, I don't want this to apply. So what we're going to do to solve this is to wrap this in a media query. Okay, so so once we want to apply this CSS at a minimum width of 768, because what we have here is 767. So I'm just going to write a media query. Okay, then I'm just going to say minimum width 768 pixel. Okay, so that's what I have there. So I'm just going to take this, copy the whole of that and put it in that media query. All right, so now we have these wrapped inside a media query, and everything works well. So if we go back here, we still have that space. What is going on here? Let's see. Yeah, we have the space. So why don't we have the space here? A minimum width. Okay. So yeah, that should be the builder thing, you know. Let's see. Do we have anything on that? Card. All right, let's take a look at it on the front end and see how it looks. I'm just gonna save it and then open it in the front end. All right, so it's just gonna view it. Let's make it responsive. Yeah. So yeah. So from here we lose that. So I want to see why I'm losing that. Okay, I think yeah, there's this problem that you know Oxygen has. If you have certain type of pseudo element that you have used before, okay, and after a while you don't see it anymore. So I must have had an nth child odd somewhere in this document while I was working with this document, and that is what is affecting this. Okay, so but if you take a look at this now, let's go back. You see it is it still has to do with card. It still has to do with the card class, but if we go to the editor, okay, we can't find it here. Okay, we can't find the nth child. So so I'm just going to manually add it because it's still there. So to remove that, I'm going to manually add it. Now this is something that I added some time back while I was working on this document, setting this document up, and it wasn't showing anymore. Okay, so and as a result I didn't know it was still there. So I'm going to put it there, and then I'm going to just put a value on it. Okay, now to be able to delete it, you have to put a value on it, and then I'm going to, oh sorry, let me remove that. That's a mistake. I wrote 0 instead of odd. Nth child odd. Okay, damn, I don't know my spelling anymore. Okay, so I have the nth child odd. So now, so take a look at this. So there are a couple of things. It's showing up that there are values here. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that nth child odd. Okay, or take away those values because it's not giving me the option to delete it. Let me put a new value here and then go there. Now I can see it. So that's one of the bugs I've seen. So certain nth child properties, I think if you put odd or even, you're not gonna see it. So and if you don't remember that you had it, you will never know that it is there unless you put it in again, okay, before you see it. And once you get out of it, you cannot see it anymore. So that is a bug in Oxygen. So let's now we've taken care of that, let's take a look at the let's take a look at this. So I'm trying to figure out why I'm still having stuff here. Okay, all right, so the nth child properties, they're kind of I'm still having that issue here. Let me save this, go back. Okay, so let's see, have this, yeah. I still have that nth child odd. Wow. Okay, let's do this. I'm gonna add it. Okay, I'm gonna add it again. This time around, I'm not just gonna delete it. I'm gonna remove the values first. So nth child odd. Now I decided to leave this part of the video. Normally I would edit stuff like this out. I mean, maybe I think I should, but I'm gonna leave this part of the video. Okay, even though I didn't add this odd in the course of this tutorial, but I'm going to leave this because these are real life problems, real life issues that you're going to be facing. Okay, so I'm going to add this again. So you see all those values are still there. So I'm just going to take them out. Okay, I'm just going to take out those values. Okay, and that's it. And that's it. Or probably just delete that value. Okay, for the odd class, nth child odd stuff. So let's see if we still have an issue. So nope, it's not there. All right, so that seems to be solved. Now take note, once I select the original and go back, I can't even find that odd. So I do hope that the Oxygen team will do something about this. I've noticed this a couple of times. So about when you add that nth child custom state. So let's continue. Let's take a look at this, how it looks. All right, so that looks good. All right, so let's not forget to align this to the base. All of them should be equal height. Okay, I'm going to save that, refresh, and yeah, everything looks good. So if we come here, once we get to this breakpoint, everything collapses. Of course, we don't have our margin bottom, okay, to separate the cards. So we're just going to go back. Let's go to that breakpoint. Now, to have that space, of course, you could just go to that, just a 10 pixel bottom. Now, it is going to apply to the last element, but you could use the last child to remove it. But if you don't care, if it really doesn't have any impact on the design, you could just leave it like that. But if you're a perfectionist, you could, do that and use the last child to remove it. But then you could also use the code block, okay, the adjacent child, and then give it a margin top. All right, so let's go here and to the code block, and then now because we want that to apply from this here, okay, from 767 downwards, I'm going to copy this media query, and then I'm just going to change this to maximum width, okay, instead of minimum width, and then maximum width of, now what we had here was 768, so we're going to give this a maximum width of 767, okay, and then we're going to change these to margin top, okay. All right, so you can see that that works, okay. So it applies a margin top to this, to the last and the middle, but not to this, and we have a solution to that. But then that doesn't apply from this breakpoint because we were using a media query. Let me save that, refresh, and there it is. So that is one way of using Flexbox layout controls. Now let's talk about the Flexbox, item order, because this is one of the topics that a couple of people might find confusing, especially because of the way it behaves. Now, let's say we wanted this card, okay, this particular, the last one, to be number 2, okay, and then we, of course, you're going to do that on the ID. All right, so when maybe you go to a particular breakpoint, and maybe you said, okay, from this breakpoint, I want this to be number 2, okay, and then this should be number 3, and then you select the ID of that, okay, and or if you want to work with the end child, no problem, but let's use the ID this time. Now you go to layout, and then you go to order, okay, you want this to be 2, right, and you put 2, nothing happens. Why is it not moving to 2? All right, let's make it 1. Nothing happens. So you wonder, why isn't anything happening? Now let's take a look at the front end. I'm gonna make it 2 and save it. Okay, we are at this 991 breakpoint, which is kind of like the iPad stuff. Okay, now at this breakpoint, let's take a look at that. Now you see the order is 2, but it's not working. Why isn't it working? So you have a situation like this and you're racking your brain, why isn't this working? Now let's see how Flexbox controls this stuff. Now let's go to compute it, and then I'm going to just search for order, okay? Okay, now this is order 2, right? But let's check this. Now, you can see that even though you didn't give these other ones order, by default, all the Flexbox child elements are given order of 0, okay? And because you're giving this 2, now 0 takes priority over 1, 1 takes priority over 2, and so on. Now because you've given this 2, but this is still 0, okay? Because since this is 2, for this to be here and for this to move here, this has to be 3. You understand what I'm saying? So if you're giving this 2 and this is still 0, this is still going to remain where it is because these are in their right order. So you have 0, 0, 2. But when they were 0, 0, 0, they remain the way they are. You give this, even if you give this 1, it's not going to move here, because for it to move here, that means this and this will have to be 2 and 3. And they will not be automatically applied, okay? Because by default, they are still 0. So giving this 2 without giving these 2, now giving these the order of 2 without giving these divs, their own order, is not going to make this move. This is going to remain where it is. So that's why this is not moving. Let's go back to the styles. Now, so we've given this 2, but we want it to move to the second. Now, for it to move to the second, we need to give this one 3. Okay? So we're going to select that one, go to the ID, and give it an order of 3. You understand? So it moves. So since this is 0, it really doesn't matter anymore, because 0 and 0 is the first. But if you gave this 1, it's still not going to move to the first. Why? Because this is still 0. 0 has priority over 1. Okay? So if you wanted to give this, make this to be the first, then this has to be the second. So you see what I mean now? So this is what you need to know when it comes to Flexbox child control order positions. So let's clear that. All right, so another thing I would like you to know is that the nth child, you know, giving it an order doesn't change now, doesn't change the nth child position. Okay, now for instance, we have the adjacent child, you know, selector for these two. Now if I move this to 3, okay, and then this is, let's say this is 2 and this is 1. Okay, now you can see that this still has, even though the adjacent child said when you have a sibling next to you, okay, now that has to do with the HTML structure, okay, not the CSS, you know, positions. So you have to take note of that. So you have to adjust your code accordingly if you're going to be, you know, using this ordering. Okay, I'm going to quickly just take that out. Okay. Save. So far we've done Flexbox layout with just one column. Okay, what if we wanted to do something that has maybe 2 columns? Okay, like something like this, 2 columns, but we don't want to have 2 separate parents. Okay, we want to have just one. We just want to have one. So what are we going to do? We've talked about using the nth child to control the spacing, but there's a very simple way of doing that. Although something is going to give, and we're going to look at that, but it's very simple. And then we're going to take a look at how to have 2, you know, columns. All right, so I'm going to create, I just want to do that with a new section, and then I'm going to add a div. I'm going to call that div, let's say card 4. Give it a background of white, and I'm just going to copy this inside that. I'm going to give it a padding of 1 perhaps 2, and I'm going to just centralize the stuff. Okay, so I have this card, and I want it to be, I'm going to wrap it with a div. Okay, so I'm going to call this, let's say card parent 2. Okay, just give it a class. Now I'm going to duplicate this into 6 because I need 6 of them. We want to have maybe the first column 3, the second column 3. So I'm just going to do that. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Now I'm going to stack it horizontally. Now, so we have this. So how do we make it like this? So you have maybe 1/3, you know, of the width of the parent for the first top, and then the second, the last set of columns 1/3 each. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use a technique. We're going to, if we set this card to, let's say, 100% like we did before, nothing is going to change. Okay, nothing is going to change. If we set it to 33% and then we go to the parent and click allow multi-line, that's going to work, but we're still going to have the same problem that we are having when we come down here and set the parent to start. We have to go back in here to change it to 100%, which, you know, if you want to do is fine, but how can we automate this such that this takes care of itself automatically? Okay, so I'm gonna take that back. So what we can do is to just go to the custom CSS for this and add a line of code. We just call it flex 130%. So now what this means is flex 130% means flex 130%, which means flex grow 1, okay, flex shrink 1, and flex basis 1. So that is the short form. Sorry, did I say 130%? Now that is the short form for this. Okay, so so instead of writing flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis, we just shorten it to flex 1. Now if you want this to be different, you can write the full shortcut, but this is the shortest shortcut, so I'm gonna leave it at that. Okay, so now we have them 3. Now I'm gonna save it and go to the front end to check it out. So this is it. Now let's go responsive. I'm going to just see what is going to behave like. So as it goes, what happens? I see it automatically, you know, collapses, okay, just by itself. Now what if we want to control at what width of this does it collapse? Okay, so right now it's going very thin. Okay, so if we look at computed value, this is going down to 173 pixel width. You know, it gets all down up to 172 before it you know, stacks horizontally. But what if we want it to stack while it is still at least say 240? Okay, maybe something like this before it collapses. So we want it to start collapsing at this point. What if we want that? So all we need to do is just to go in and give it a minimum width of 240 pixel, and then that is for the card. And then when we refresh this, so let's see that. So it still goes very narrow. Okay, so let's change that to 280. All right, I'm going to change that to 280 and refresh. Let's see. 280 works. So once it gets to this point, it breaks into 2, and then we go further before it breaks into 1. Okay, so that works. So that is one way to do it. Then how about the gap? Now for this kind of situation, it's going to be very tricky using the same technique we used here, because we only had 3 columns here. Sorry, it was just 1 column here, but here we have 2 columns, so it's going to be very tricky. We will do a lot of multiple media queries, so we don't want to do that. So one simple technique we're going to use is, let's say we wanted to have 20 pixel of spaces gap in between the Flexbox item. We will set you know, the card margin to 10 pixel all. That's just it. And now I said something is going to give when we do that. Okay, now to the parent, I mean the parent doesn't have any padding, so it's basically 0. Okay, so there's no padding. Now what the downside of this is that this is not going to line up with the page width, and it's a compromise that you can make, okay, if you don't mind. So, and this doesn't need any adjustments in the breakpoint. It automatically, you know, adjusts itself and works throughout all the breakpoints. So that's just the way to do this. Okay, so it's just a simple way. But normally, if you wanted to use do this kind of layout, maybe you would prefer to use grid instead of Flexbox. But I just want to show you, if you had to use Flexbox for any reason, this is what you can do. Okay, so now some people may be asking, what on earth is flex basis? Now what flex basis means is the flex basis property specifies the initial length of a flex item. So it tells the flex item what length it should be. Let's say the width. okay, of the flex item. So when we say flex basis of 30%, we are saying start from 30. You can be bigger, but your initial length is 30. So when we give it the initial length of or width of 30, it starts there. Now, if the space is not enough, okay, it can shrink. For instance, when we come down here, it shrinks, but it never shrinks below 30% of the width of the container. So it cannot go below 30%, but it can go bigger than 30%. Like when you have 2 here, it is now 50%. That's why you have 2. So this is 50% of the width of the container, okay? And then when you get to this breakpoint, this is now 100% of the width of the container, but you're giving it the initial width with the flex basis. Now, what if we wanted it to be 50-50%? We're going to give it, now if you give it 50, see what is going to happen. It's going to take the whole. Why? Because there is no space for 50. Why is there no space for 50? Because we already have spaces here. So you have to account for those spaces. So it wants to be 50, but there's no space for 50. So it pushes the other one down and takes 100 because it can't go below what you gave it. Because if it has to fit itself in here with this gap, it has to be less than 50. You see? So instead of giving it 50 to account for the space, you can give it like 45, okay, or 40 to be on the safe side. Just give 40. It can't be. It's gonna take up all the available spaces. Now that's what the flex grow does, and the flex grow allows it to take up whatever space is available. So it is important that you give it less than, once there is a space, just give it, if you want it to be 50%, just give it a little bit less, okay, because it can't go below this 40, and whatever space is remaining is going to fill up. Okay, so now if we go here, we're going to see it take up that whatever space is available. Then when we get here, it breaks into 1 1. Okay, so that's it. So let's take it back to 30%. So it takes up 30% and whatever space is available for it. So that is what flex basis does. Now let's talk about sizing. Like we're going to be talking about minimum width, minimum height, maximum height. We're going to talk about different tips and tricks on how to set sizes. All right. Now the first thing I want to talk about is the use of viewport height. All right, let's quickly duplicate this section. Okay, and I have a section here, and I want to give it a background of, let's just make it very dark blue. Okay. All right, just want to make it that dark. I'm gonna save that, and what I want is, I want this section to be filling the whole viewport. So when I view it, okay, when I view it, it's gonna be 100% of the viewport height. Then I go and then I apply okay, height, let's do it 100%, 100 viewport height, and then I save it, and everything looks great, beautiful. Okay, and then we happen to have maybe more content. Okay, so let's say I have more content, so I duplicate that and save it. So we've set our height to be 100%. Okay, I'm already laughing. Now look at what is happening. Now a lot of people have this issue where they have 100% viewport height, and then they're like, wait a minute, my contents are overflowing. And then to make matters worse, in some cases it's not that obvious. Let's take this out, and let me find a way to take out some of the content here. So for this second div, I'm going to remove, let's say, the text. Okay, and probably I don't know, I just want to make it smaller. Okay, let me just reduce the sizes of these images. Okay, so I'm just gonna do it on the okay, that's not gonna work because all the cards is still gonna remain the same height because of this. Let's just undo that. Okay, now I want a situation where So let me take this out completely. Now I want a situation, so I'm going to just increase the height. Okay, all right, just gonna increase that. So now I want a situation where this looks okay on this screen size. Yeah, everything is perfect. And then of course we have this hello world here. Please ignore it. Now when I said I was going to use code block to write my CSS, it's only for the purpose of while I am working. I'm not going to leave this code block with the CSS for production. Okay, I don't think it's advisable to do that. So if I finish working, I'm just going to copy everything out here to the style sheet and delete this. So don't mind that hello world showing up there, but let me just comment it out. Okay, save this. Now everything looks great. Okay, you have your 100% viewport height and you're happy about it. Now let's go responsive. Okay, and now someone has a 14-inch laptop. Okay, to view it, and then this is the height of the laptop. Okay, maybe something like that. And then the person is complaining that the content is overflowing. Okay, because you were viewing it on your large screen, but when the guy with the 13 inches laptop is looking at it, or someone with an iPad turning it landscape is looking at it, things don't look good. Okay, things don't look good. Worst of all, if someone with a phone is looking at it, oh my god, it's really terrible. Everything just goes really bad. You can't even tell what is going on here. Okay, let's go responsive. But that doesn't even show up. I'm not quite sure why that is, but all right. See, it shows up probably. Okay, just the background that changed. So why do we have a different background for that section? Okay, from here, I think, okay, I remember when we wanted to preview how this looks. Okay. All right. So let's refresh that. So now you look at it on the screen and only the first card shows up and the rest just overflows into other content in the body. Now that's because you told this section to be 100% viewport height. Okay, so now we've seen the problem that causes. So if you want to have a section that is 100% viewport height, never ever use 100% viewport height. Instead, use a minimum height of, okay, that's the use a minimum height. Make it minimum height. So what you're telling it is that it should never go smaller than 100% viewport height, but it has the freedom to go bigger to accommodate the content. So if we refresh this and then we go smaller, so you can see whatever we do, it grows to accommodate the content, but it can never ever be smaller than 100. Even if the content is smaller, it cannot go below 100% viewport height. It will always be a minimum of 100% viewport height. So this is the right way to do it. So even if we view it on iPad, you see it accommodates. If we view it like this, where the content is bigger than the viewport height, it grows to accommodate. So that is one sizing tip you should keep in mind. Now the second one I want to show you is what how you can use maximum width for a very useful layout. Okay, now I'm going to take this out. Okay, since I want to be working with this card class, I'm just going to remove it because we already had a card 2 class. I don't want to affect what I'm doing here. Already we apply some weird margins to this and it's affecting it. So let me return that. Okay, now we have the card 2. All right, so I'm going to take off everything that we're doing here. All right, I'm going to take off that 100%. I'm going to save that. Now what if we have a situation where I wanted this to be, say, only 400 pixels, okay, on the desktop, but when we go to mobile, I want it to be, you know, just 100%. It fits, but I don't want to change stuff at different breakpoint. I don't want to, be doing breakpoint changes. Now, how can I do that? What I'm going to do here to make that happen is the best approach is to make it 100% width, but make it a maximum width, okay, of 400 pixel. Now, you have 400 pixel here, okay, but as you go, it's 400, 400. Now, when you get to, you see what happens. Okay, let's assume we wanted to make it, we want to make it like, say 600, all right? Or we don't want it to fill all the way. Maybe we want it to be 700 maximum width on the desktop, but we have already given it a width of 100. Now, what we are telling you is this: you have the freedom to be 100%, but never grow past 700 pixel. Okay. Now, so where it has enough space to grow more than 700 pixel, it's going to stop at 700. But once the space is smaller than 700 pixel, it will automatically switch to the 100% width to fill whatever space is left. So in this case, we don't have to adjust anything. So this can come in very useful in some situations. So because if you wanted to make this 700 pixel, okay, now once you start getting to the lower breakpoint, of course, see, it's going to grow more and give you that issue, and then you have to come back here again to take it back, and then you come here, but with this approach, okay, where you have 100% and give it a maximum width of 700, that automatically takes care of the other breakpoints. So it saves you the trouble of multiple media, query settings. So that is one thing to have in mind, the use of maximum width. It also very useful for a situation like this. So let's say you just want to make this, a bit shorter. You don't want it to span all the way here, and then you want to give it a maximum width of 300. Okay, and that takes care of itself when it goes to the lower breakpoint, okay, because it just scales accordingly. Now you're telling it, look, don't grow beyond that at this breakpoint. So since it is already at this breakpoint, which is the biggest breakpoint, I mean, you're not going to have any problem. So if it can go, it can adjust and grow smaller, as you can see here, okay, but at the larger breakpoint, it remains 300. So now using maximum and minimum width is very important. Now, in what situation would you need to use minimum width? Now, there are a couple of situations that could come in very, very handy. Let's go back to the Flexbox. Now, okay, so let's see how we can use the minimum width here. All right, so I selected this, and we've been using the end child. This time around, I just want to use this, okay, the center. But for something like this, I think using the end child is still good, because we always want any div that is in the center, any card that is in the center, to have maybe a specific width. So I'm still gonna go with the card, and I'm gonna add that end child 2. Okay, so every time it has to apply. Now I want to set a minimum width of 50%. Okay, now so what this does is, any card that is in the center will always be a 50% minimum width. Now that takes care of the responsiveness automatically, because at this breakpoint, what you're having here is everything is 100% here, so it really doesn't matter here. Maybe here it's a little bit. I think this is okay. So let's go to the front end and check it out. And so if we go responsive, let's do like that. Let's put this at 100%. Now if we go responsive and then go all the way down, so you see at the appropriate breakpoint, it stacks horizontally. So but while it is 3, you want it to be at least 50% of the container. So that is one way you can use a minimum width. Okay, so you're saying don't go smaller than 50%, but if possible, you can go bigger, as in this case. So that is one use case for minimum width. Okay, since we're talking about sizing, okay, I think there's one extra thing that will be very useful. So I'm going to take off that minimum width from the card class. Okay, I'm going to take it off, and let's look at something. I think this had too much of pixels, so let's remove that. Okay, now let's talk about one important or one cool tip. Let's say you want to have all your cards to be say square. I want to go to the card CSS and then add one line of CSS, okay, and I'm just gonna call it aspect ratio, okay, aspect ratio 1. Now let's collapse that. Now the way this works is it tries as much as possible to make your container or your card square as long as the content allows it. So it's not very strict. So if I take away, let's say I take away all this. Now what is going to happen is it's going to make sure that your card becomes a perfect square. So let me just take that away. You can see the difference. Once I put that aspect ratio, it adjusts, you know, the ratio of the width to the height to be 1:1. Okay, so let me do this. Let me reduce this card image so that we can have smaller image. Let's say 100 pixel. Okay, let's do that. And let's go back to the card. Now let me take away the aspect ratio 1. Now normally this is what would happen to this card. This is how it's going to be, okay? But if you wanted it to be square no matter what, okay, it's going to, you know, it's going to force the aspect ratio of 1:1, and the only exception is if the content permits. So if the content is small, it's still going to stretch beyond that. So let's assume that you want to put content in the middle. You want this kind of, you know, layout where you have content in the middle and you always want it to be square. So you could use this. Now even when you go to the lower breakpoint, you can see that it maintains that square 1:1 ratio everywhere. So that could come in handy in some situations. So I just wanted to point that out. Now let's talk about one other challenge that I see a lot of people have a problem with, especially people that are not very familiar with CSS. So I'm just gonna put, let's say, some text here, okay. I'm gonna apply that class of card text, card description, okay. I'm just gonna copy that, you know, just put there. All right, so we have this text, and then I'm gonna drop in a button. All right, okay, nothing too stylish, just a button. I mean, I just can't help myself. I wanted to make it stylish, but okay, just a button. Oops. All right, and then I'm also gonna let me just call this card, okay, button, and then I'm gonna just take that button and put it here. All right, so I have those buttons, and I'm gonna just put that. And let's say we had more text here, okay? So I'm just gonna copy Lorem Ipsum and just paste. All right. Now for this, I want it to align to the top, okay? So now we have this problem where we have unequal content, and then we want our buttons, all of them, to align to the bottom. Now there's just two ways to do that, two simple fix, okay? And the third one is just a hack. For instance, if we go to space, it's gonna spoil things. The buttons might do as if, so that doesn't work. If you go bottom, this is gonna move here. So anyhow you do a space between, it's just not gonna work. So what you're gonna do is, the first thing is you can take the button and go to size and spacing and change the margin top to auto, and that is going to align it, okay? Now another way you can do it is you can select the second to the last element. That's the second to the last, okay? And then you go to size, to layout, and then set the flex grow to 1, okay? So that is going to push it all the way down to the same level. Those are the two ways you can use in aligning content to the bottom of, you know, the card. So if you have a button like this, you want them to align, this is how to do it. So that's it for this part. In the next part, we're going to take a look at CSS positioning, and we're going to take a look at absolute positioning. We're going to take a look at sticky position and their use cases, and fixed position and their use cases. And then we're going to introduce CSS variables and how important they are to positioning. It is absolutely crazy how CSS variable can play a very big role in positioning. So we're going to take a look at all that, and we're going to take a look at the before and the after elements, and how to use it to to create decorative elements and all that, the use cases and all. So I'm gonna see you in the next lesson. So I hope you like this video, and if you do, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you will not miss the next part. Okay, so see you some other time. Have a great day.